I still remember that night like it was yesterday. The way the forest swallowed our laughter until it was just us and the whisper of wind through the pines. We'd been out hiking most of the afternoon, a small group of friends from college who thought we knew these woods better than we really did. The plan was simple. Take a shortcut back to camp instead of following the long, looping trail. The map made it look easy. Just a gentle curve across a ridge and then down toward the lake. Easy enough, we said, stuffing it into a pack and setting off with confidence and half a bag of trail mix between us. The sun was dipping low, brushing the tops of the trees with gold. Every so often we'd stop and listen. Woodpeckers knocking in the distance, the rustle of squirrels, the low hum of the forest settling into night. But as the light faded, the path we thought we were following started to vanish. The trail markers we expected to see were nowhere. "It's fine," I said. "We just need to head west. The lake's that way." It sounded sure enough to convince the others, except west didn't seem to stay in one direction for long. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees grew, and soon even the ridge we were counting on for our bearings had vanished into the darkness. A cool breeze began to rise from the hollows, and the smell of damp earth and pine needles filled the air. We trudged on, headlamps flickering to life one by one, each small beam slicing through the darkness. It wasn't until we crossed the same fallen birch tree for the third time that I felt that creeping chill crawl up my spine. "Wait a second," said Mark, shining his light across the pale bark. "That's the same one, isn't it?" We all froze, realizing the truth at the same moment. We had been walking in circles. The forest suddenly seemed alive with sound. The snap of twigs, the sigh of branches rubbing together, the distant hoot of an owl that made the hair on my arms stand on end. No one said much after that. The air was cooling fast, and the last light of dusk had drained completely from the sky. Somewhere out there was our campfire, burning low beside the lake, but it might as well have been 100 miles away. Panic didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly, like the mist that began to drift through the trees. At first, we tried to laugh it off. "It's fine," Rachel said. "We'll just backtrack." But when we turned around, none of us could remember which way we'd come. Every tree looked the same, and our footprints had already blurred into the damp leaves. The woods had a way of folding in on themselves, making directions meaningless. We decided to stop and get our bearings. Mark pulled out his phone, but of course, there was no signal. Even the compass app spun uselessly, like it was as lost as we were. I dug my old map out of the pack, but under the faint glow of my headlamp, it might as well have been written in another language. The forest wasn't matching up to anything printed on paper. That's when I realised how quiet it had become. No birds, no crickets, just the faint whisper of wind through the pines and the rhythmic thump of my own pulse in my ears. We huddled together for a few minutes, the beam of our lamps forming a small island of light. "We'll pick a direction and stick to it," I said. "The lake can't be that far. If we keep steady, we'll hit the shoreline." It sounded logical enough, so we set out again, keeping the North Star roughly to our right. The forest floor was soft underfoot, a thick mat of pine needles and moss that muffled every step. After about 20 minutes, the ground began to slope downward, and relief flickered through me. Maybe this was the ridge leading to the water, but then I noticed something that made my stomach sink. The same crooked birch lying like a pale skeleton across the forest floor. We had come right back to it again. That was when the joking stopped for good. I could see it in everyone's faces, the wide eyes, the quick breaths, the dawning realization that we weren't just turned around. We were lost. Somewhere in the endless maze of trees, the campfire was dying down, and our tents waited empty under a darkening sky. We were on our own now, and the night was only just beginning to close in. We gathered beneath the crooked birch, our voices low and uncertain. The forest had changed in the dark. It no longer felt like the friendly place we'd hiked through that morning. Every shadow seemed to move when you weren't looking, and the trees stood like silent sentinels, closing ranks around us. I remember the smell most of all, wet bark, moss, and the faint metallic tang of the creek we couldn't find. "We should make a fire," said Rachel, hugging her jacket tighter. "Just wait for morning." It was the sensible thing to do, but even the simple act of finding dry wood felt like a challenge. Everything was damp, and the wind kept sighing through the branches, like the forest itself was warning us to keep moving. Still, we worked together, Mark striking the lighter again and again, me shielding the flame with my hands, until finally a wisp of smoke caught in the twigs. When the first small flame flared to life, it was like a heartbeat had returned to the world. We sat close around that tiny fire, feeding it carefully, watching the sparks float up and vanish among the branches. For a while, nobody spoke. Then, as often happens when fear gives way to fatigue, the stories began. Small ones at first. Rachel talked about her brother getting lost on a fishing trip when they were kids. Mark told us about the time his scout troop mistook glow-in-the-dark fungus for camp lights and walked in circles half the night. Each story, strange as it was, helped keep the fear at bay. But the woods weren't finished with us. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked, sharp and sudden. Then another. We all froze, listening. It could have been an animal, maybe a deer, maybe something else. The sound came again, closer this time, deliberate. The fire popped, and in that moment the shadows around us seemed to lean forward, as if the night itself were listening too. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my mind racing through everything I knew about the forest. Whatever it was out there, it knew the terrain better than we did. Probably just a raccoon, I whispered, trying to convince myself as much as the others. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The darkness had weight now, a living, breathing presence pressing in from every side. The sound faded after a while, though none of us dared move for several long minutes. The fire crackled softly, throwing light that seemed too small for all the dark pressing around it. I remember watching the trees sway, the moonlight flickering through their branches like the world was breathing. The forest had gone quiet again, too quiet. Even the wind had died. It felt as though the woods were holding their breath, waiting for us to make the next mistake. "We'll be fine," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "As long as we stay put, we'll find our way at first light." It wasn't much of a plan, but it gave us something to hold on to, and we gathered more wood, careful not to stray far from the glow. Every now and then, one of us would turn suddenly, sure we'd heard footsteps or seen movement in the trees, only to find nothing there. The mind can play cruel tricks in the dark. Around midnight, the temperature dropped fast. The warmth from the fire reached only our faces. Our backs stayed cold. Rachel pulled her knees to her chest, shivering. Mark tossed on a heavier branch, sending sparks spiraling upward. Somewhere high above us, an owl called, long and mournful, and the sound echoed through the trees like a warning. Then came the fog, slow at first, a thin silver mist curling along the ground. Within minutes, it thickened, swallowing the forest in a ghostly haze. The firelight bent and flickered strangely, shadows moving where no one stood. I could barely see the outline of my friends, their faces pale and uncertain through the shifting grey. That was when I noticed something glinting faintly in the dirt, just beyond the ring of light. I leaned forward and picked it up. It was a rusted tin lid, half buried in leaves, the kind campers use to cover a cookpot. "Someone's been here," I said quietly. "Maybe an old site." Hope sparked for a brief second, proof that we weren't completely alone out here. But as I looked closer, I saw the faint remains of a circle of stones, almost invisible beneath the moss. A campfire long abandoned. Whoever had made it had left long ago. The realization settled in my chest like a weight. This forest had seen plenty of lost campers before us, and not all of them had found their way back. Dawn came slowly, filtering through the fog like a promise we barely dared to believe. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and we sat close, our faces drawn and eyes red from smoke and sleeplessness. The night had been long, full of whispers we couldn't name, the creak of branches, the soft pad of unseen feet just beyond the reach of light. But when that first streak of gold touched the treetops, it felt like the forest finally released us from whatever strange hold it had over the dark hours. We packed up quietly, stamping out the coals and brushing away what little trace we'd left. The mist still clung to the ground, making the trees look taller and the world unreal. I pulled the map out again, more for comfort than guidance, and took a moment to breathe the cool morning air. It smelled of pine, smoke, and the faint sweetness of damp earth, alive again in daylight. With the sun now rising behind us, we picked a direction that felt right and started walking. It wasn't long before the terrain began to change, smoother, more familiar. Then Rachel pointed ahead. "Wait, do you hear that?" At first it was faint, just a murmur carried on the wind. Then it grew clearer. The ripple of water, steady and sure. The lake. We broke through the last line of trees and saw our camp across the water, the tents still standing, our gear just as we'd left it. Relief hit all at once. We didn't cheer or shout. We just stood there for a moment, quiet, taking it in. The forest behind us seemed to watch in silence as we crossed back to camp, as if deciding whether to let us go. Later, sitting by the rekindled fire, mugs of coffee in hand, we talked about it. How close we'd come to real trouble, how the woods seemed to twist around us, how even the stars felt strange that night. But mostly, we talked about how small we'd felt, how easy it is to lose yourself when you stop paying attention. That night changed the way I walk through the wilderness. I still take shortcuts now and then, but I never forget that the forest has its own rules, its own rhythm. You can't fight it. You can only listen, follow, and hope it leads you home.